Tonight is a soulful Shabbat, and we'll get there. But this is not an ordinary Shabbat for any of us. For we know, friends, that a new Dead Sea flows in Israel, not from the Jordan River, not named for the lack of life within its waters. This is a sea made up of the tears that have poured without end over the last 2 days as we face the horrific deaths of these beautiful boys on our screen. Ariel and Kfir Bibas, pictured here with their mother Shiri, whom we fear will also soon be confirmed to have died as well as a hostage in Gaza. There's no words for all the emotions that are swirling inside of us, bubbling over as we wrestle with the anger, the grief, the rage, the sadness that the deaths of these two boys present for all of us. Since October 7th, they have been symbols. For so many, these two boys represented the complete lack of humanity and decency of our enemies. Who would take two children like this, ages 4 and 9 months, at gunpoint from their home, drag them through the desert along with their mother, and hold them in captivity? Even animals have a natural instinct to protect children. Who would do this? Every time we saw protests lionizing Hamas, we ask ourselves, who would support an individual or group that would do this to children, young children? How much do they hate Jews that they can justify the abductions of Ariel and Kfir? You may remember that when the posters were going up and being ripped down in cities, it was their poster that was being taken down. Why? Because to have those two young, innocent faces was to show the true depravity of Hamas and those who attacked Israel and their hatred for Jews. We cannot forget that their deaths are also a permanent mark of shame, not only for Hamas and those who did this, but for the Red Cross, the United Nations, Doctors Without Borders, and every other nonprofit that has been in Gaza since October 7th and has failed to search for these two red-headed boys or to show an ounce of compassion for their innocent lives. While they were symbols for us of what was being done, their faces for so long filled us with hope. We prayed and hoped until that final confirmation came that somehow, some way, they might survive this terrifying ordeal and return, that at least one Gazan would have the courage of those Germans who remember from Nazi Germany standing up to risk their lives to save and protect Jews, that there might be one person in Gaza who would see these two little red-headed boys and say, this isn't right. I have to do something about it. Friends, there's an entire forest, it's been pointed out, in Jerusalem. There are plaques everywhere celebrating the righteous of the nations, those who resisted the Nazis, who risked death to save Jews during World War II. And yet among 2 million people, there's not been a single righteous Gazan to stand up and identify a hostage. Not one. That's hard for us to swallow and understand. And right now, the confirmation of Ariel and Kfir's deaths casts a shadow over us all. Many I've seen have been in a daze since their news came out. We find it hard to focus, those emotions churning beneath the surface. avoiding the news or social media, knowing that those outlets will only enrage us further. How dare they be called captives and not hostages in all capital letters? How can anyone note their deaths without saying they were murdered? How is everyone on this planet Earth not weeping beside us at the death of 2 young children? Tonight, our emotions may not feel in sync with a soulful Shabbat, with a service filled with music. Yet music can tell many stories. Some of the slower pieces, including the one we'll open with in a moment, and later Yesh Kochavim, may resonate with us more deeply tonight than they ever have before. After all, it is a soulful Shabbat, not a joyful Shabbat, and our souls need this sustenance. In Judaism, we make space for Shabbat, and we do our best to hold on to hope even in our darkest hours. Many may know it's the custom that when one is in mourning, you remove the Shiva ribbon right before Shabbat. You set aside your grief, that garb of black, and allow yourself a respite, a time to pause from the pain and the sorrow. Elie Wiesel would speak about the rituals that they had inside the concentration camps, that they would gather small bits of wax, bread, and juice over the course of the days so they could make Shabbat each week. When someone would ask him why would he go to such effort when their lives were hanging in the balance, Wiesel would say it was important, even in those bleakest of times, to say l'chaim, to life, to keep the spark of hope alive. And there is also the teaching of Rabbi Emil Fackenheim, who taught that there should be a 614th commandment: thou shalt not grant Hitler a posthumous victory. Despite all that we have suffered, all the pain that we feel, the last thing that we should ever consider is to give up hope, to forget our rituals, to leave behind the Judaism and the traditions that have been carrying on for generations, knowing that every time we celebrate Shabbat or a holiday, every time we say a blessing, every time we sing a prayer, we prove that our enemies have failed. Not one of them, from the Babylonians and Romans through the Nazis and Hamas, have defeated us. For as long as we embrace our Judaism, as long as we gather like this and mark our sacred occasions, we are the ultimate victors. So tonight, despite the tears and all that you might be feeling, let your voices join with ours. Experience this soulful Shabbat and embrace all that comes in this service. Should your voice crack or tears stain your cheeks, they are just evidence that we have not forgotten those whom we have lost. They remain with us. Ariel Bibas, Kafir Bibas, Oded Lifshitz, and all the others whose lives have been taken during this bloody conflict and by our enemies across the generations. With our hearts and our voices, we will honor them all tonight by showing that the people Israel continues to live on, despite all that we have faced. Am Yisrael Chai.